does. Arguing for the end of adult marijuana prohibition is easy because we have facts, science, reason, compassion, evidence, truth, and logic on our side. It is even easier when researchers catalog it all for us. Learn how to gather the facts on marijuana use, arrests, seizures, rehabs, drug tests, and more in this edition of Drug War Data Mining. Welcome back, everyone. 23 after the hour, and in the Drug War Data Mines today, we're going to take a look at the children, because one of the big concerns about marijuana legalization amongst those who aren't naturally supporters of legalization is what effect it might have on the children. And now, with a year under our belt of legalized marijuana markets in Washington and Colorado, some preliminary data is coming out, and when you first hear it, and when some of our opponents first hear it, you might be very concerned about some of the things that are being said. This latest story I picked up from Como News, that's one of the news affiliates up in Seattle, Washington, that says the Seattle school district says pot to blame for most school discipline in Seattle. Between the start of the school year and January 7th, according to the story, marijuana made up 77% of all disciplinary actions taken against students. Okay, so 77% of all disciplinary actions. Is that an increase or a decrease? The school administrators seem to think so. Lisa Davidson, who does drug prevention efforts at Seattle Public Schools, say this year and last year is the first time that we have really seen the edible products come into our buildings. The confiscation of pot-infused caramels and drug-laced lemonade and so forth. Davidson said, quote, "What I'm hearing from principals is they are seeing more marijuana use during the school day. They're hearing more about it from students, and they're seeing different types of marijuana use," end quote. One of the parents who has 2 children enrolled in Seattle Public Schools says, quote, "Kids have started to think of marijuana as not being particularly dangerous," end quote. Also, we have some data coming out of Colorado, where in Colorado, high school drug incidences are down or flat since 2010. It's an interesting thing. 2009 is when the state's medical marijuana code passed in May of 2010, and that's where commercialization really took off in Colorado. And we did see a spike in high school drug incidents, that happened right after that acceptance of the medical marijuana market. But from about 2011 on, those high school drug incidents have been decreasing. And in the first year of commercialized legal markets in Colorado, it has remained steady. So it appears that after an initial surge in 2009, there's been a decline since then. But that does not play out for the middle school students. There was an initial surge in the middle school students in 2009 with the advent of medical marijuana dispensaries, and another surge for middle school students after the implementation of recreational marijuana shops in the state of Colorado. So this has some people concerned, but I think it's important that we get some context on understanding these numbers. Part of the context we need to know is from the National Survey on Drug Use and Health. And the government's survey on drug use in America does show that among people aged 12 to 17, your school-age kids, that there was an increase in both Colorado and Washington. Colorado's students increased by 6.59% their monthly use of marijuana, or how many of them are using marijuana. And in Washington state, there was an increase of 3.81%. Both of these landed Washington and Colorado in the top 10 among states that had an increase in youth marijuana use. But also in the top 10 are Florida and Utah. Florida had a greater youth increase at 6.97%, and Utah had a greater youth increase at 4.49% than did Washington. So Florida beat Colorado and Utah beat Washington, despite the fact both of those states are some of the most anti-marijuana states there are, and as far from legalization as you could possibly get. So trying to blame legalization for the rise in Washington and Colorado may be missing a bigger picture, and that bigger picture is that there is a rise overall in marijuana use in many states, regardless of what policies are in place. One way that we can judge how much marijuana consumption there is going to be among the youth, at least the way that our opponents have been looking at it, is through a look at their perception of great risk in marijuana smoking. How many students think it is very risky to use marijuana once a month? And when we look at that, both Washington and Colorado come in the bottom 10 of states where kids think marijuana use is very risky. But when we look at the bottom 10, they are 2 of the bottom 10, and the rest of the states that are in that bottom 10 are all medical marijuana states. Alaska, Massachusetts, New Hampshire, Oregon, Rhode Island, California, Vermont, District of Columbia. And it would bear to reason that in a state where people, and even young people, know marijuana is being used for medical purposes, they would perceive it as being less risky. So this is not a surprising number for us to find out. The thing I think we need to take away from this data, and that we need to understand in moving forward with legalization, is to remember that the question here is not whether or not kids should be using marijuana. We don't want to see kids using marijuana, but we shouldn't be surprised when there's an increase in this after they've found out they've been lied to for decade upon decade. As we legalize, there may be an initial spike like we saw in Colorado, but I think as time goes on and marijuana becomes more mundane and mainstream, youth use will return to normal.